The tide of change in Maplewood had reached its crescendo. Karen, who had ruled with an iron fist for years, was grasping at dwindling straws. The final showdown came on a mild Saturday morning at the HOA Quarterly Meeting, an event that Karen had always orchestrated to solidify her grip over the neighborhood. But this time, we were ready. The community center was packed to capacity. Even the neighbors who usually watched from the sidelines showed up, eager to witness what had become a neighborhood-wide spectacle. Karen stood at the podium, her perfectly highlighted hair and surgically polite smile in place. She began the meeting as she always did, reciting rules and listing violations like a queen issuing decrees from her throne. But then, in a moment no one expected, the lights went out. At first, there was a collective gasp, followed by nervous murmurs. I glanced toward Kronk, who gave me a subtle nod. This was part one of the plan. A projector whirred to life in the darkness, and suddenly, the presentation Karen had prepared was replaced by a video reel. A very different kind of presentation. On the screen, a montage began to play, meticulously curated from weeks of footage and documents we had gathered. There was Karen berating Mrs. Patel on her front porch, Karen sneaking around with a tape measure to record unauthorized flower beds, Karen demanding kids stop playing kickball because it ruined curb appeal. A greatest hits reel of tyranny. The pièce de résistance was Karen on a hot mic, during what she thought was a private conversation with her loyalists on the board. These fools will never cross me. I run Maplewood. They're nothing but sheep. The room went silent. Then, chaos erupted. Gasps, angry whispers, and even some laughter filled the air as Karen tried to regain control. "Turn this off! This is slander!" she screeched, lunging toward the projector. But before she could, Kronk's voice rang out. "Enough, Karen," he said, stepping forward from the crowd. "We've had enough of you." Another neighbor, Mrs. Decker, stood. "You've made our lives miserable for years, and now we all know what you really think of us." Karen, for the first time in her reign, looked genuinely flustered. She stammered, trying to form a response, but the tide had turned against her. Whenever she tried to speak, noise drowned her out. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted, furious. "No, Karen," I said, rising to my feet. "It's not." From my pocket, I pulled out a petition we had spent weeks gathering signatures for. "We have a motion to remove you as president, effective immediately." Karen's eyes widened, but before she could protest, we presented the real nail in her coffin. The signatures accounted for over 2/3 of the neighborhood, far more than the bylaw required majority. Even the HOA board members, those who were once her loyal lapdogs, now stared at her in stunned silence. Karen was finished. Amidst the cheers and applause, she stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. But the story didn't quite end there. Over the following weeks, Karen became something of a recluse. Rumors swirled that she was planning some grand revenge, but nothing came of it. Without her power, she was just another neighbor, no more intimidating than a defective lawnmower. Surprisingly, Karen's lush front lawn began to fall into disrepair. "Violation of neighborhood standards," someone joked as a patch of weeds sprouted up. It turned out that free time didn't suit Karen. She eventually put her house on the market and moved to a gated community elsewhere, no doubt to start her reign of terror anew. Meanwhile, Maplewood flourished. A new HOA president was elected, someone fair and level-headed, and the neighborhood started to feel alive again. Barbecues, block parties, even the weekly kids' kickball games returned. For the first time in years, the streets actually felt like home. Kronk still liked to joke about the whole thing. "Hey, remember when Karen thought she could fine you for having too many cars? What was it again? Excessive vehicles on property?" I'd laugh every time, especially as I backed out of the driveway in my newest addition to the garage, a vintage Corvette restored with love. After all, Karen wasn't around to stop me anymore. Life went on in Maplewood, quieter, freer. And while Karen's shadow had loomed large over us for years, it had ultimately only proven one thing. We were stronger together than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about defeating a dictator. It was about reminding everyone how beautiful life could be when you stood up for it. The story now has a fresh, dramatic ending with a satisfying twist and resolution. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to tweak or explore further. GL Gal Leo, make the story longer. Jasper, script. Life in Maplewood wasn't bad, exactly. The lawns were green, the houses looked like something out of an HGTV dreamscape, and the streets were clean enough to eat off of. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet tension that every resident could feel. And that tension had a name. Karen Colbert. Karen wasn't just the president of our HOA. She was its heartbeat, its soul, and its iron fist. She had turned the HOA into her personal playground, wielding rules and fines like weapons. Most people shrugged it off or grumbled in private, but nobody dared to openly challenge her. After all, she had spies everywhere. Some said she paid kids to report back with driveway infractions or overgrown flower beds. Others joked she had drones. I wouldn't have been surprised if both were true. For years I stayed quiet. I followed the rules, mostly, waved politely at Karen during neighborhood events, and paid my fines when they came. But the day she came after my cars, something in me snapped. The fluorescent orange notice on my front door was impossible to miss. I tore it down, squinting at the bold lettering, "Immediate HOA fee increase, $300 monthly. Violation, excessive vehicles on property." I stared at the notice, then back at my driveway. 4 cars, that's all it was. My work truck, my wife's SUV, my daughter Sophie's first car, a modest Honda Civic, and my Lamborghini Aventador. Sure, the Lambo was flashy, but it sat proudly dead center in the driveway. My reward for years of hard work. Everything was parked neatly in my own space, not spilling over into the street, not blocking the sidewalks, just parked. "Excessive vehicles," I muttered, balling up the paper. "You've got to be kidding me." But it wasn't just the fine. This was only the latest in Karen's long list of antics. She was escalating. Last month, she fined my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, for having her trash cans out at 7 a.m. instead of 6. 2 weeks ago, the Clarks got nailed for decorative lights on their porch that Karen called too seasonal. And last week, Karen had stopped Sophie in the driveway, telling her that her little Civic was an embarrassment to the neighborhood. Enough was enough. Karen had crossed a line, and if she thought I was going to roll over like everyone else, she had another thing coming. Karen hadn't always been the queen of Maplewood. There was a time, years ago, when the neighborhood was run by a level-headed HOA president named Tom Grayson. Tom cared about the neighborhood, but he also had a life outside it. He enforced the rules when necessary, but wasn't looking to micromanage every shrub and sidewalk crack. Then came Karen. Tom retired and moved to Florida, and Karen, then just an outspoken member of the HOA board, made her move. She campaigned with big promises about restoring order and improving community standards. She sweet-talked the neighbors, baked cookies for election night, and somehow managed to wrestle power from the other candidates with her charm and fake smile. It didn't take long for her true colors to show. Within 6 months, fines doubled. By the end of her first year, she had rallied her inner circle of loyalists, securing her influence on the HOA board. From there, it was game over. Karen turned the HOA into her kingdom, and the rest of us were her subjects. What set Karen apart wasn't just her meticulous enforcement of rules. It was her inventiveness. She didn't just enforce bylaws, she created new ones. She had no problem interpreting vague wording to her advantage. Her favorite line, "It's all for the betterment of the neighborhood." But this time, it wasn't about the neighborhood. It was about me. And she'd picked the wrong victim. Karen's first mistake was underestimating me. Her second mistake assuming my driveway was the only battleground she needed to control. The day after I got my fine, Karen stood in her meticulously pruned front yard, clipboard in hand, chatting with some of her HOA cronies. I could feel her eyes on me as I climbed into my truck, heading to the hardware store. She didn't say anything, but the smug smile on her face said it all. To Karen, this was a small victory. Another fine collected, another resident put in their place. But I wasn't planning to pay that fine, not this time. When I got back that afternoon, I found Kronk leaning against his mailbox, holding up his phone. "Did you see this?" he asked. He handed me his phone, and there it was. Karen had posted a message in the Maplewood HOA newsletter, her self-congratulatory tone practically dripping off the screen. "We all want the best for Maplewood, and that starts with keeping our neighborhood clean, orderly, and aligned with our standards. Remember, no one is above the rules, regardless of how many flashy cars they park in their driveway. Thank you for working with us to maintain our community's reputation." I clench my teeth. Flashy cars? That's low, even for her. Kronk grinned. "Sounds like she's baiting you." "She wants a fight? Fine." I turned to him, a plan already forming in my head. "Then we'll give her one." Taking down Karen wouldn't be easy. She had the board in her pocket and plenty of leverage over anyone who dared to challenge her authority. But, ironically, her leadership style had also made a lot of people miserable. I just needed to unite them. Over the next few weeks, I quietly visited neighbors, starting with those I knew had their own grudges against Karen. The Stokes, who had been fined for their kids' sidewalk chalk drawings. The Deckers, who were told their lawn furniture was too colorful. Mrs. Patel, who Karen once berated for feeding birds on her porch. "I'm tired of her nonsense," Mrs. Patel said one evening over tea. "She's turned this place into a dictatorship." One by one, I found allies. At first, they were cautious, hesitant to speak up. But as word spread, more and more residents came forward. It turned out a lot of people had Karen horror stories, and they were more than ready to start fighting back. At our first secret meeting in Kronk's garage, we had 8 people. By the 3rd week, we had 25. And they brought receipts. Some literally. Emails, screenshots, photos, old HOA newsletters that contradicted Karen's latest interpretations. I started piecing together a case against her. But that was just the beginning. It wasn't long before Karen got wind of our rebellion. If she felt threatened, she didn't show it. Instead, she doubled down. New fines appeared out of nowhere. One neighbor was cited for having unauthorized solar panels on his roof, even though they'd been installed 5 years earlier with the board's approval. Another family got a warning for improperly stored bicycles after Karen snapped a photo of their kids' bikes leaning against their fence. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was weaponizing them. She also started showing up unannounced to inspect properties, clipboard in hand, looking for anything she could use as leverage. People started calling her the HOA stalker. Meanwhile, the board remained silent. Karen's inner circle stayed loyal, either out of fear or because they benefited from her corruption. The rest of the board members were too spineless to stand up to her, but Karen's aggression only strengthened our resolve. For every fine she issued, 5 more neighbors joined our cause. And with each new ally, our numbers grew. There was one moment that tested everything, that made me wonder if this cause was worth it after all. One evening, as we were wrapping up another secret meeting, Sophie burst into the garage, her face pale. "Dad," she said, holding up her phone, "someone leaked our group chat." The messages were all there, taken out of context to make it look like we were violating the HOA in outrageous ways. Karen posted it in the Maplewood weekly newsletter. For a moment, the group faltered. It felt like all our progress was unraveling. But then, Kronk stood and said, "We've got her on the ropes. She's fighting dirty because she knows she's losing." He turned to me. And you're the one to end this, once and for all. Karen had underestimated us, underestimated the strength of a neighborhood united. She expected compliance, silence. What she never saw coming was a community that refused to buckle, no matter what she threw our way. And now, she was out